one of the things that's been very successful for our farm is to try to be out in front as far as we can be technologically. And one of the first things that really helped was that we got the URL pheasant.com back in 1994. I applied for it, cost me $15 for an application. I applied for MacFarlane.com and I got turned down. And thank God I did, because pheasant.com has meant a lot more to us.
Oh, yeah.
Our farm has been located on the south side of Janesville since 1929. I'm only the second generation. My dad was 51 when I was born, and I'm 66, so that's how it works out that I'm only the second generation. The farm has been located, do most of you kind of have an idea of where the farm is?
They may not. So
Between the airport and Janesville.
Yeah, between the airport and Janesville, it's been there, but most, especially women, don't know where it's at, but they know where Vera's House of Bridals, the bridal shop, is right across the street. But the farm's been there for many years. My dad actually was Don MacFarlane. He had 4 children with my mother, and in 1945, their children were 8, 4, 2, and just born. And they went on a trip up to Duluth, Minnesota, and they passed through an area where there were a couple of cafes, and they talked about which one to go to. And the one they picked, the chef was contagious for polio, and my dad got polio from being there. And he ended up being in an iron lung, and he recovered enough to be able to breathe, but he was paralyzed from the waist down. And 10 years after all this, I was born. So I'm 10 years apart from the rest of my siblings, and my father always treated me in a way that I didn't understand, a very good way. And I think it was that after I got older and figured it out, was he assumed people thought he couldn't father a child because was paralyzed, and all of a sudden along came little Billy, and I guess I meant something to him. Anyway, I grew up on the farm, raising pheasants in the farm, and didn't want to be there at all. When I was out of high school, I wanted to leave. So I went to Houston, Texas, and went to college. Back in the years, this is on the south side of Janesville. These are brooder pens, brooder houses, and the little houses, which I get. Yes, those little houses hold 300 pheasants apiece. And the way we would raise them, we'd raise them up to be 3 weeks of age in the house. In 3 weeks, they would run outside into one of those long pens you can see on this, like on the upper part of the screen. And then every afternoon, we'd herd them back in. So that entire operation right there, as you see it, would hold about 4,000 pheasants. One of our brooder barns today holds 40,000 pheasants in one brooder barn. So the economies of scale have changed. You want to go to the next one? This is a aerial picture in the 50s. This is where the existing farm is located now. The airport's to the right, Janesville's to the left. And we were still using a system of herding the birds in and out of houses and raising them up in the upper part of the screen in pens that had no cover over the top. To keep the pheasants from flying out, we brailed them. And the word brail is a word that means a leather strap that holds one wing tight against the feather, the breast of the pheasant. So very labor intensive, very expensive to do, and didn't work well, but this is the way we did it in the 60s. This is in about 20 years ago. We started having pens that had polyethylene netting over the top, like fish net, to keep the predators like hawks and owls out and keep the pheasants from escaping. We went to much higher density birds because we started using anti-cannibalism devices like a peeper, or there's different devices. The way we didn't debeak the birds the way in the chicken industry, because the pheasants, do you guys have any idea where the pheasants we sell go? I mean, primarily they're to hunting preserves. And if any of you aren't muted, what state do you think we sell the most pheasants to of any state?
South Dakota.
Correct. Very good. Most people would think that would be the last place I'd sell pheasants, would be South Dakota, but actually there's more pheasants released in South Dakota per year, I think, than probably the rest of the country nearly put together. because there's so many people that go out there to hunt wild pheasants that there aren't enough wild pheasants to be had. Anyway, this is the way the farm looked about 25 years ago. This is more like Quick Trip, like somebody that works for me put Quick Trip on there. Everybody knows what Quick Trip is. This is a picture of the farm maybe 10 years ago. Up in the top is the pens where the birds are raised. We raise about 2,000 birds to the acre, and we have 200 acres of netted pens. So we have enough pen space for 400,000 adult pheasants. So this year it will be very similar to 2 years ago. Last year, there's nothing similar about last year. Last year was very tough in the pheasant business, but going back to 2019 and going this year, we'll hatch 2 million pheasants on our farm. About 1 million of them will be sold as babies to other people that want to raise pheasants, both commercially or in their backyard, depending. And the other 1 million we keep to be raised ourselves, either for meat or for hunting. The ones for meat are white pheasants. They're processed at a local processing plant, and we sell about 200,000 that way a year. The other type of birds are live pheasants sold to hunting preserves. You guys, where would be near? There's hunting, Milford Hills. Does that mean anything to you? There's hunting clubs, Warren Valley. There's a number of hunting clubs all over Wisconsin, all over the country. We sell pheasants to those types of operations. And there's probably 500 production pheasant farms in the country. The people that produce pheasants, we're about twice as large as the second biggest farm in the country. Just because our location, and we have a long history of raising birds. This is our breeder farm. This is separate from where the picture you just saw before this. These are pens that we raise the birds, we breed the birds in colony situation, colony meaning polygamous, lots of them females, but we raise them at 10 to 1, 10 hens for every male, and we'll usually run about 400 females in a pen. Because of the risk of disease, especially something called avian influenza, we've moved most of our breeding operations to Missouri, and we breed most of the birds we breed. The eggs are laid in Missouri, and we truck the eggs up twice a week to Wisconsin to be hatched here.
What motivated you to move from university when you said you didn't want to be in the pheasant farm to come back?
That's a good question. My dad's lawyer was Paul Ryan, not Paul Ryan, the one you know, but the father. His father was my dad's attorney. And I got a letter in my senior year of college pleading with me to come home because I was the youngest kid. I was basically the last way they were going to keep the farm going. And the day after the letter arrived, the Houston Post had an article on people's happiness in their job. And my thought up until that point was I was going to go to law school. My intention was to go to law school at Austin, Texas. And I wanted to go there. Where do you think lawyers ranked on satisfaction with their jobs?
About 40%.
If that, Michael's on top of it. On the other hand, farmers in general are happy with what they do. And so one day I had a letter arrive from my dad's attorney, and the next day on the front page is a Houston Post. So it wasn't quite a cloud pointing me a direction, but it was pretty hard I really took it to heart that was a sign that I needed to be really thinking about it. My father had invested his life in this farm, and without me not coming home, he really didn't have any future for it. So that's your answer, Gordon. This is another farm that we bought a few years back. It's about 40 acres of pens at 2,000 birds to the acre. That's 80,000 birds on this farm. We have operations around different areas: Belleville, Fort Atkinson, Missouri, as I said, Milton, Wisconsin. This is down south of Janesville near a town called Afton, Wisconsin. And we've tended to spread out our farm from a biosecurity standpoint. We've tried to spread it out more. So back in the early years, the pheasants were actually incubated by chickens, like in the central picture. The birds would a chicken would be placed with pheasant eggs, and the chicken would hatch the pheasants, and the chicken couldn't get, those bars kept the chicken from escaping, but the pheasants could come and go. Obviously, the number of birds they raised in the early years was just minuscule. And the left side is the hatchery as it was in the 60s. And then on the right side is the more modern hatchery, which we've expanded on. We have the capacity to hatch about 125,000 pheasants a week. We are at capacity, and I'm 66 years old, and we're trying to decide which direction we're going to go. Last year, COVID really affected us in some ways very positively, in other ways very negatively. The positive is that many more people wanted to be outdoors and see wildlife or go hunting, and they didn't have football games to watch or basketball games. So the hunting clubs we sold birds to had the highest demand we've ever had in the industry, and the prices we were enabled to get a good price for our birds. On the other hand, our meat business is primarily cruise lines and high-end restaurants. I'll give you one fact. The biggest meat customer we had in 2019 is a supplier to the cruise lines, and they bought $550,000 worth of product from us in 2019. In 2020, that customer bought zero, not one quarter, zero, nothing. And so we had quite an upsurge in part of our business, quite a dance in the other. The one thing good is a part of the business that we had trouble with, the birds are dead and frozen, so at least we have some longevity, whereas the live bird business, it would have been much more punitive that business got under. So we've tried to be, we have some identified core values, and one is being stewards of the earth. And this is a composter machine, the biggest composter you've ever seen, and it works really well. You put pheasants in one end and mulch comes out the other. We applied for a USDA grant to help pay for it, and it works really well. And it's big enough to handle all the dead birds that we produce in the farm, and turns into quite a good deal. So on the left side is the way, that is actually a picture of MacFarlane pheasants. That's the way we trucked them in the 20s or 30s and 40s. The reason we truck our own pheasants, when we ship frozen pheasants to, let's say, a distributor in California, we can ship the birds on common carrier, one of those freezer trucks, no problem. But when we deliver birds that are live to customers across the United States, and we deliver them in our trucks, we can't put them on common carriers because birds are, so we went from, on the top back in the 90s, we were using pickup trucks to pull loads. We're now using semi trucks, even bigger than the one that's on the bottom there. These are the main birds we raise. On the left side, Chuck or redleg is a pretty much of a staple bird across the hunting preserves. Manchurian pheasants, that is a type of pheasants that we imported from China in the late 80s. And the ability to get any kind of live animals out of China has completely evaporated because of all the disease in China, not only human disease, but animal disease. So we have a proprietary genetics of a pheasant that comes from China, and have been able to profit significantly from that. The Melanistic Mutant, the lower left, is one of the main birds we raise. The Melanistic is a pure breed. It's not a mutation, even the word is mutant, it's not. And it's a beautiful iridescent bird, and we have a good market for it. Up in the top right, we have white pheasants that we use for meat. All the birds that we raise that are white are raised for meat. And we've done a lot of genetic selection to get them much more quickly. Our biggest customer in the meat business is Whole Foods, and we do quite a good business, and they audit us to make sure that we're doing things ethically. The next bird is Hungarian Partridge. That's a bird that we do not breed. We buy the eggs from a farm in France. We buy 6 shipments of eggs a year, and we raise about 40,000 Hungarians out of that flock. And then the ringneck, the lower right, that's the main bird. That's 80% of all the birds we produce are ringnecks, like in the lower right. And then the food business, which is quite different. It's a different demographic. It's a different bird. It's a different feed. It's a different protocol. Standard operating protocols are much different. But by diversifying into a different business, it's like last year, it's helped us survive the ups and downs. Our biggest obstacle with pheasant is it's perceived as very expensive. Most people perceive it as healthy, so there's no problem there, but it's perceived as expensive. We are starting to make some inroads into getting pheasant into Woodman's, for instance, carries pheasant. Some of the local stores are starting to carry pheasant. We're doing better. Yeah, we're going to collect about just shy of 3 million pheasant eggs this year to produce those 2 million chicks I talked to you about. And we actually have to wash all those eggs. So a lot of the machinery and equipment we have is very specific to our farm. This is an egg washer. It's sort of like a car wash machine. You go in one end and there's brushes and jet sprays and all sorts of things. You come out the other end and there's a blower to dry them off and it cleans the eggs. That's sort of a quick overview of my farm. I certainly could go into an area. If you have an area you'd like a little more explanation, I'd be glad to expound on that.
Bill, do you have a retail outlet in Janesville?
Yes, we do. We are
What is the address of that?
2821 Highway 51 South in Janesville. It's right on the south edge of Janesville on US 51.
Okay.
And we've done quite well there, but our bigger way to sell birds is online, and that's pheasantfordinner.com. Just the word pheasantfordinner.com. That's where you can order online.
Bill, in the dairy, and we've got a lot of egg farms around, they have to deal with a tremendous amount of waste from the birds and the cows. How do you deal with your waste runoff or so forth?
Well, first of all, the density is so much lower. It's comparable to about 2 cows per acre. So if the amount of waste produced by pheasants in an acre is equivalent to about what 2 cows would. But some of the most lucrative areas for raising pheasants are sandy farms because they drain well and the birds don't drag their tails in muddy mud.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the pheasant farm, included ours, are on sandy soil, which means a lot more ability for any kind of nutrients to get down into the groundwater. So the biggest thing we can do is to not get the densities anything crazy. So to give you an idea, chickens that are raised on the ground are often raised in buildings that like 1 or 2 chickens per square foot. And if they're in cages like S&R, you know where S&R is up near you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Those guys have, if you look at the square footage of the building and how much manure is produced, it's crazy. In our case, we're running 20 to 25 square foot per bird. So the amount of feces that's produced is not an issue to speak of. I'm not saying it's just not an issue at all, but it's not an issue to speak of. Area would be the phosphorus that would be in the feces. And the way to attach that is to keep the densities from getting too high. There really isn't too much we can do to keep it from getting down into the ground, but does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Where do you get your feed?
Currently, we're buying our feed from a company called Kent Feeds on the south side of Rockford.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in any position to efficiently produce the amount of feed we need. We'll use about 6,000 tons of feed, or a little more than that, in 2021 at a cost of about $300 a ton. So we'll spend about $2 million on feed. That feed that we have made is pelleted and the equipment is very expensive. So we are in a contractual agreement with a mill to buy all the feed. We do transport all the feed in our own semi-trucks. And one of the problems we have with feed is getting something called mycotoxins are in the feed. So we want to buy feed from a company that doesn't have mycotoxins, and that's Kent Feed. That's where we went.
Bill, question for you. What's the average size of a bird sold in a store, as a complete bird? And then secondly, is there such a thing as pheasant drummies?
We'd be glad to sell you whatever parts of the pheasant you want. But unfortunately, pheasant legs, and if I assume you mean drummies, you mean legs. Pheasants are athletic type birds, and there's not much meat on their legs. They're pretty scrawny compared to what you're thinking of. As far as the store, our average bird is about 2.5 to 3 pounds for an eviscerated, cleaned pheasant, like you see a chicken in a store. When we started breeding white pheasants for meat in 1988, it took us 22 weeks to get a bird to market size, which would be 4 pounds. It took us 10 years to get that down to 16 weeks to get a bird to 4 pounds. We got to 12 weeks to bird to 4 pounds last year, and we have quite a flock of birds that are reaching 4 pounds live weight at 8 weeks of age. I know the chicken industry is going to longer raise. I don't know how many of you know this, but the chicken industry is going to birds that take longer to raise. We're trying to get birds that will get bigger quicker. Does anybody know how old chickens are when they go to the processing plant? How old is it from day old to the day they go to be processed? 35 days.
Oh,
From a little
wow.
chick, where am I? Here I am. From a little chick to a whole big bird in 35 days. So we're at 12 weeks and proud of ourselves, and not even in the game. We're not even in. What else you got for me?
What's the feed mostly consist of? Is it corn or what?
Yeah, primarily corn and bean meal and wheat. And I don't know how much you guys follow commodities, but those commodity prices have spiked over the last few months because there's such an increased demand. But we have a company that we pay to tell us when to buy feed. And 6 months ago, they told us to buy all the feed we could for as far out as we could. So we bought 2 years worth of feed six months ago. And we are so far ahead of the game. The price of feed has spiked $125 a ton more today for a spot price than what we have it booked for. So that's going to be really good for me because it's going to enable us to raise our prices because most of our competitors did not do that. I'll be humble and say that that was a good thing to tell you about, but there's been 10 more that have not gone so well. So if any of you would like to know more about the farm, the URL for the farm is pheasant.com, just the word pheasant.com. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Nice to meet all of you. Talk to you again.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.